Welcome in, everyone, to today's deep dive. And I have to be honest right out of the gate. Looking at the materials we're unpacking today, you might think you've accidentally stumbled into a different show, like Welcome to the Funeral Channel Network podcast.
Right, yeah, it definitely has that vibe at first glance.
It really does. But stick with me for just a second here.
Yep.
Because I want you, the listener, to imagine a scenario. Picture two distinct funerals happening on the exact same day.
Okay.
One features this incredible, solid bronze casket, like lined with the most expensive crushed velvet, polished to an absolute mirror finish.
Top of the line.
Exactly. And then the other funeral, maybe just down the street, features a simple, unvarnished pine box.
Yeah.
It's put together with, basic iron nails.
It's a stark contrast.
Right, because in our everyday secular world, one of those screams immense generational wealth, and the other screams poverty.
Oh, absolutely. We judge those things immediately.
But the moment both of those caskets cross the threshold of a Catholic church, there's this ancient ritual that takes place, and it completely, instantly erases that difference.
It just vanishes.
Yeah, completely vanishes. The wealth, the status, the earthly power, it's gone.
I mean, it really is one of the most visually striking and psychologically profound moments in any end-of-life ritual. It completely upends how we typically measure a human life.
Which is exactly why we're here today.
Mm.
We are taking a deep dive into a focused guide on Catholic funeral practices. Specifically, we're looking at the incredibly nuanced, deeply personal, and frankly, often misunderstood ways that we process grief.
Yeah, specifically through the lens of viewing the body after death.
Right. The agonizing choice families face between an open or a closed casket. But I want to say up front, whether you grew up in this tradition, whether you follow a different faith entirely, or if you consider yourself strictly secular, this framework is just fascinating.
Oh, for sure, because it's not just a list of archaic rules about what to do with physical remains.
Yeah. Exactly. It's essentially a masterclass in human psychology, dignity, and how we actually confront the finality of life. And I promise you an aha moment today regarding how a simple piece of fabric serves as the ultimate equalizer.
I can't wait to get into that. But to really understand any of those practical choices, like whether to open the casket at a wake or why that ritual with the pine box and the bronze casket matters, we really have to start at the foundation.
The theology.
Right. We have to strip away a lot of modern assumptions about what a human body actually is.
Let's start exactly there, because before we get into the logistics of, funeral homes and wakes, we need to understand why this specific framework places such an immense importance on the physical form in the first place.
Yeah, the why is crucial here.
Because in a lot of modern secular thinking, the body is basically just wetware.
Wetware, right.
Like, it's a biological machine, it's a meat sack that carries our consciousness around. And when the machine breaks down irreparably, the person is gone.
And you just respectfully dispose of the shell.
Exactly. But the Catholic framework operates on a completely different paradigm.
A radically different paradigm. I mean, the teaching is that the human body is not merely a temporary vessel. It's not a disposable container for the soul.
It's much more permanent than that.
Yes. It is considered a literal temple of the Holy Spirit. And, this goes back to ancient theological debates. Throughout history, there were movements, like Gnosticism, for example, that argued the physical world, including the human body, was corrupt.
Like it was evil.
Yeah, or, at best, an irrelevant prison for the pure spiritual soul. But the Catholic Church actively rejected that.
They pushed back on the idea that the body is just a trap.
Exactly. They cemented the idea that the physical, material body is inherently good and intrinsically tied to human identity. And, furthermore, there is this core belief that the body is destined for eventual resurrection.
Which means the physical form is permanently linked to who you are. It's not just, a rental car you drop off at the airport when your trip is over.
Precisely. It's yours forever. And because of this belief, the body as a sacred temple and its ultimate destiny for resurrection, the physical form has to be treated with the absolute utmost reverence.
Both while the person is breathing and after they've stopped.
Exactly. This belief anchors every single decision a grieving family is guided to make. They aren't just managing the logistics of biological remains.
They're honoring a sacred space.
Right.
I was trying to wrap my head around this concept. Having deep reverence for something that is no longer animated. And the analogy that keeps coming to mind for me is an empty childhood home.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. Think about the house you grew up in. Let's say your family eventually sells it, you move out, and the house is totally empty. The electricity is shut off, the furniture's gone, the carpets are pulled up.
It's just an empty shell at that point.
Yeah, but if you walk through that empty house one last time, you don't look at it as just a pile of 2x4s, drywall, and glass.
No, not at all.
You step lightly. You might, trace your hand over the doorframe where your height was measured when you were a kid. You feel a sense of awe.
Because of what happened there.
Exactly. Not because anyone is living there at that exact second, but because of the profound, beautiful, life-shaping things that happened inside those walls. The physical structure retains an imprint of the life it held.
That captures the psychological weight of it perfectly.
And in this theological context, it's paired with the belief that the owner will ultimately return. Like, you don't just bulldoze that house without a second thought.
Right. You are honoring the history of what that structure housed. When a family gathers around a body, they are acknowledging, the hands that built their childhood, the eyes that looked at them with love, the voice that offered comfort.
The physical matter is inextricably linked to the love they experienced.
Yes, and the theological framework validates that deeply human instinct to hold on to the physical form. It's why viewing the body, whether in an open or closed casket, is treated as an opportunity for continued respect.
It's not just morbid curiosity.
Not at all.
So for everyone listening right now, I just want you to pause and think about how your own view of the human body aligns with that. Like, do you see the physical form as something inherently, lingeringly sacred even after death?
Or do you lean toward a more pragmatic view?
Right, seeing it strictly as the biological reality that has just run its natural course. Because whichever side of that spectrum you land on, it completely colors your emotional reaction when you walk into a funeral home.
Oh, it absolutely does. And this is exactly where that abstract theological foundation, the body as a sacred temple, collides with the very raw, visceral reality of human grief.
Because holding a theology in your head is one thing.
But standing in a room with the body of someone you love is something else entirely.
Yeah, that brings us to the actual gathering, the vigil, or the wake, as a lot of people call it. This is where we get into the deeply psychological mechanics of the open casket.
And the profound human need for the tangibility of death.
Tangibility. Let's unpack that.
Right.
Because the vigil is the designated period before the formal funeral mass, right?
Yeah, right. It usually takes place at a funeral home, and traditionally this is where an open casket is utilized. Friends and family gather in a less formal environment than a church.
They share stories, they cry, they pray.
And they physically approach the body.
And there is a massive psychological mechanism at work here.
Hmm.
This isn't just a social convention so people can, drop off casseroles and offer condolences.
Far from it. I mean, the sources highlight a profound psychological benefit to the open casket that grief counselors and pastoral guides constantly emphasize.
Which is?
It forces the tangibility of death. Look, human psychology is heavily wired for survival. And part of that survival mechanism is denial.
Oh, for sure. Denial is powerful.
When we lose someone, especially if the loss is sudden, the human brain actively struggles to comprehend the permanence of that absence.
Like, you intellectually know they died.
Right. But your brain still expects them to walk through the front door at 5:30 p.m. You expect to see their name pop up on your phone.
The cognitive dissonance is just staggering. Your
Yeah.
logical brain and your emotional brain are existing in two entirely different realities.
Exactly. And seeing the body bridges that gap. Being physically present with the deceased provides a concrete, undeniable reality.
It breaks the denial.
Yes, it is often a crucial, albeit incredibly painful, step in the grieving process. It forces the mind to accept what has happened.
It provides an emotional connection that helps mourners transition from that agonizing "is this real" phase
To the incredibly difficult, how do I live with this reality phase.
Okay, I completely understand this psychological mechanism of breaking through denial. I get that. But, and here's where I want to push back a little, if the goal of the vigil is to honor the body and provide a space for grieving, I keep thinking about the situations where seeing the body might actually be counterproductive.
Counterproductive how?
Well, is the psychological benefit of the open casket truly universal? Because it seems to me like seeing the body could sometimes traumatize people rather than comfort them.
That's a very valid concern.
Right. Like if someone suffered a long, physically devastating illness, or if the circumstances of their passing were really tragic, the reality of death in those moments isn't peaceful. It's horrific.
It can be very harsh.
So doesn't forcing someone to look at that violate the principle of comfort?
That tension you're identifying is exactly why this framework is so vital. And it's a reality that funeral directors navigate every single day. The Catholic guidance is remarkably clear-eyed about this.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It does not demand an open casket as a mandatory test of faith.
Oh, thank
It's
goodness.
not a psychological requirement either.
That is a huge relief. So there isn't some dogmatic rule saying you must look at the body to properly honor the temple.
Not at all. The text we're looking at explicitly acknowledges that the emotional impact of viewing a body varies immensely from person to person.
So it's very individualized.
Very. While some family members might find it deeply comforting, absolutely necessary to reach that point of acceptance, others might have a profoundly negative reaction.
Because for some people, the visual reality of a ravaged body might just override all the beautiful memories of the living person.
Exactly. They strongly prefer to remember their loved one exactly as they were in life. Animated, vibrant, and whole.
And the church is okay with that.
The critical takeaway from the source material is that both of these emotional responses are considered entirely valid.
I think that flexibility is just so important.
Yeah.
Because grief is already such a heavy, suffocating burden.
It's exhausting.
The idea of adding a layer of religious or familial guilt on top of it, like I couldn't bring myself to walk up to the casket, so I failed them, or I did the funeral wrong, is just terrible.
It would be. But the entire purpose of the vigil is to comfort the living and pray for the deceased. The rituals are supposed to be tools for healing.
Not weapons of guilt.
Exactly, not weapons. If an open casket facilitates that healing and acceptance, then it serves its purpose perfectly.
But if it doesn't,
Right. If an open casket is going to cause severe distress or night terrors or, overwrite decades of beautiful memories with one traumatic image, then it is not serving its pastoral or psychological purpose for that specific family.
which means the closed casket isn't a failure to honor the body, it's actually a protective choice.
It's a deeply pastoral decision based on the practical realities of the situation.
I love that. So a closed casket is completely acceptable.
Completely acceptable and deeply respected in Catholic practice. The reasons a family might choose this route range from the intensely personal to the purely logistical.
Like the physical condition of the body, like we just talked about.
Yes, if there's a traumatic accident, an open casket simply might not be feasible. Or it would require such extensive cosmetic reconstruction that the body no longer resembles the person the family knew.
Oh, man. Which introduces a whole other layer of psychological dissonance.
Yes, the uncanny valley.
Right. If the person looks like a wax figure of themselves, that doesn't help with closure. It just feels unnatural and disturbing.
The uncanny valley effect in funeral practices is a very real phenomenon, and it can disrupt the grieving process just as much as denial can.
Beyond the physical condition, what else drives the closed casket choice?
Personal preferences of the deceased. Perhaps they specifically laid out in their final wishes that they wanted a closed casket.
And you have to respect that.
Honoring their agency over their own physical form is a profound way of showing that reverence we discussed earlier.
Now, if we were talking about the physical condition of the body and the decisions families have to make, we have to talk about embalming.
Oh, yes.
Because this detail in the source material completely stopped me in my tracks.
It is one of the most persistent misconceptions about religious funeral practices.
Right. Because think about it. If you have a theology that is so intensely focused on the resurrection of the body.
And you believe the body is a sacred temple of the Holy Spirit.
Exactly. I think the average person, myself included, would just naturally assume that the church mandates strict preservation.
It seems logical on the surface.
It totally seems logical. Like, you'd have to embalm the body, pump it full of chemicals, seal it in a concrete vault to keep the temple intact for as long as humanly possible,
Yeah.
right? Just waiting for the resurrection.
Right.
But that is not what the guidance says at all.
No, it states very clearly that embalming is not required.
That is wild to me.
I know. Embalming is heavily utilized in North America, largely due to, the industrialization of the funeral business and the logistical delays of getting families together for a viewing.
Right. People have to fly in from across the country.
Exactly. But it is not a theological mandate. The church actually supports simpler, more natural practices.
That is surprisingly grounded. Like, it's a highly pragmatic approach to death.
You really is.
It's as if the theology recognizes that the body is deeply sacred, but it also just accepts the inescapable biological reality of returning dust to dust.
Yes. It doesn't demand artificial suspended animation to prove that you believe in the resurrection.
So how does the theology reconcile the decay of the body with the promise of resurrection?
Well, that is the crux of the theology. The Catholic belief in the resurrection of the body is not a belief in the literal reanimation of a chemically preserved corpse.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not a zombie situation.
Right. The theology speaks of a transformed, glorified body. Therefore, the natural physical decay of the biological form does not threaten or invalidate the theological promise.
The divine isn't hindered by decomposition.
Exactly. This is why the framework allows families to embrace natural burial practices, green burials, or simply skipping embalming entirely if local laws permit it and an open casket viewing isn't planned.
It just strips away so much of the rigidity people assume exists in religious dogmas regarding death.
It's much more human-centric.
Yeah. The focus stays on the spiritual reality of the transition, the dignity of the person, and the psychological health of the family, rather than enforcing this physical spectacle of preservation.
And that shift in focus from the raw physical reality of the body to the broader spiritual reality becomes incredibly evident when the timeline of the funeral progresses.
You mean moving from the wake to the church?
Exactly. When the family moves from the vigil at the funeral home to the actual funeral mass at the church.
Okay, let's go there. Because we've been talking about the wake, the viewing, the environment where people are talking quietly, maybe crying openly, and physically interacting with the casket.
A very emotionally raw space.
But then, usually the next morning, the body is transported into the church for the funeral mass, and the entire atmosphere changes dramatically.
The architecture of the space changes, the tone changes, and the visual focus undergoes a complete pivot.
Walk us through that pivot.
Well, during the funeral mass, the casket is brought down the main aisle and placed near the altar. But in almost all cases, regardless of whether the family chose to have an open casket at the wake the night before, the casket is firmly closed during the mass.
No, wait, let me pause you there. If the psychological benefit of an open casket is so powerful for breaking through denial, and the family was completely comfortable with it being open just 12 hours prior, why mandate closing it in the church?
It's a great question.
Like, why create that boundary all of a sudden?
Because the funeral mass serves a fundamentally different purpose than the vigil. Closing the casket acts as a physical and psychological boundary line.
How so?
Think about the energy. During the vigil, the emotional energy of the room is entirely horizontal.
Horizontal, meaning person to person.
Yes, it is focused horizontally on the person who died, on the immediate raw grief of the family, and on the relationships between the living mourners. It is a time for looking backward at the life that was lived.
Okay, I follow that.
But when the body enters the church, the energy shifts vertically.
Ah, toward the divine.
Exactly. The funeral mass is a liturgy. It is focused on the worship of God, the sacrifice of Christ, and the hope of the resurrection.
So the community is basically being guided to stop looking back at the past and start looking forward to the future they believe in.
Precisely. If the casket remained open during the Mass, the congregation's focus would inevitably remain fixed on the physical body.
On the tragedy of the death.
And on the raw emotion of the immediate moment. By closing the casket, the church gently but firmly shifts the community's gaze away from the spectacle of death and toward the promise of eternal life.
And this brings us back to the scenario I asked you to imagine at the very beginning of our deep dive.
The bronze casket and the pine box.
Yes, because when those caskets, whichever one it is, are closed and brought down the aisle of the church, they don't just sit there bare. A very specific ritual takes place.
The casket is covered with a cloth.
It is covered with a pall. P-A-L-L.
Right. It is a large, heavy white cloth that is draped completely over the casket, usually by the family members or the priest, right as the body enters the church.
And the symbolism here is just staggering to me. The white cloth symbolizes baptism, yes.
Yeah.
But it fundamentally symbolizes absolute equality before God.
Yes, it does.
Just think about the visual impact of that in real time. At the funeral home the night before, the differences in earthly wealth are glaringly obvious.
Oh, impossible to ignore.
Right. The family with the bronze casket, the elaborate floral sprays, the custom lighting. Their wealth is on full display. And the family with the basic pine box in a smaller room, their lack of wealth is equally obvious. And we judge those things. It's human nature.
We absolutely use them as status markers, even in death.
Exactly. But the moment they cross the threshold of the church for the funeral mass, this ancient ritual intentionally strips all of that away.
It erases it.
Once that white pall is draped over the casket, you literally cannot tell the difference between the $30,000 bronze casket and the $300 pine box.
They look identical.
The earthly status is erased. Every single person, regardless of how much power or money they hoarded in life, looks exactly the same as they are carried toward the altar. It is the ultimate equalizer.
It is a profound visual statement rejecting the metrics of the secular world. It visually declares that at the end of our lives, our wealth, our corporate titles, our zip codes, our achievements,
Yeah.
none of it crosses the threshold with
You
us.
can't take it with you.
You really can't. The pall brings the deceased back to the very beginning of their spiritual life. In the Catholic tradition of baptism, a white garment is worn to signify being clothed in Christ.
Oh, so it's a deliberate bookend.
Exactly. The funeral pall mirrors that exact garment. It signifies that before God, a person's primary and only enduring identity is simply as a child of God, not as a CEO, not as a celebrity, not as a pauper.
I really want you listening to chew on the power of uniform rituals like that, because we live in a society that is hyper-obsessed with status.
Hyper upset.
We brand everything. We monetize everything. Even the funeral industry is heavily tiered based on what you can afford.
It's a huge business.
To have an ancient, unyielding ritual that deliberately forces everyone to leave their status at the door, it's incredibly powerful. It doesn't just honor the person who died.
It binds the entire community together.
Yes, it reminds everyone sitting in those pews, the rich and the poor alike, that we share the exact same biological vulnerability and the exact same ultimate destiny.
It is a powerful unifying force. But of course, the journey to get to that unifying moment in the church isn't made in a vacuum.
What do you mean?
Families have to navigate the logistics of these choices in the messy reality of the modern world. Theology is ancient and abstract, but grief happens in the present, surrounded by a lot of competing voices.
Oh, that's so true. Which leads us into how modern families actually make these decisions today, because you don't just read a theology textbook and instantly know how to plan a wake.
Right, you are dealing with outside influences, immense cultural pressures, and increasingly the impact of modern technology.
Let's talk about the culture first. How does that play into the open versus closed casket decision?
Cultural expectations, perhaps more than anything else, heavily influence that decision. It's important to remember that Catholicism is a truly global faith, encompassing thousands of different cultures.
And each of them has their own distinct mourning traditions.
Exactly. What is considered a comforting norm in a parish in Boston might be entirely different from a parish in Manila or Mexico City.
Right, so in some cultures, an open casket is not just a polite option.
No, it is an absolute non-negotiable expectation deeply woven into the fabric of the community's mourning process. To have a closed casket, unless the physical circumstances absolutely mandated it, might be perceived as an affront to the community.
Like an insult.
Yeah, or a sign that the family is hiding something, or a failure to properly honor the deceased.
Wow. While in other cultures, a closed casket is the default assumption, and an open casket might be viewed as overly macabre, intrusive, or violating the privacy of the deceased.
Precisely, and grieving families are often caught in the crossfire of those expectations.
I can imagine.
They might feel pressure from extended family members who insist on an open casket because that's how we've always done it, even if the immediate family finds the idea traumatic.
So how do they resolve that? Who breaks the tie?
This is where pastoral guidance becomes absolutely vital. The framework relies heavily on priests, deacons, or experienced funeral directors to step in.
To run interference.
Exactly, to help families align these intense cultural pressures with the underlying theology, while prioritizing the psychological well-being of the immediate mourners. They act as mediators.
Helping the family navigate the friction between what our extended culture expects and what is actually best and healthiest for our specific family in this exact moment of tragedy.
Perfectly said.
And complicating those cultural expectations even further is the rise of modern tools, technology.
Oh, technology has drastically changed the landscape.
It really has, because technology has changed how we document our lives, which inevitably changes how we document and process our deaths.
We are seeing more and more alternative or additions to the traditional open casket viewing.
What kind of alternatives are highlighted in the source material?
Well, technology has introduced entirely new vocabularies for honoring the deceased. Instead of, or alongside, a physical viewing of the body, families are increasingly utilizing high-definition video tributes.
Elaborate photo slideshows set to music.
Digital memorial pages. Resources are widely available like template platforms that help families design custom memorial programs.
Right, that weave traditional Catholic prayers and values with modern, highly personalized aesthetic elements.
Exactly.
Okay, so I have a thought on this, and it's something I personally wrestle with when I attend modern funerals.
What's that?
I see these beautifully produced video tributes The slideshows with the perfect emotive acoustic guitar music, showing the person smiling on a beach vacation, blowing out candles at a birthday party, dancing at a wedding.
They are undeniably beautiful and deeply moving.
They are. But, and here is my concern, if we deduce the psychological mechanism we talked about earlier, that the open casket is vital because it forces the brain to confront the hard, physical reality of death.
Right.
Doesn't replacing a physical viewing with a highly polished 4K video tribute risk sanitizing death completely?
That is a very perceptive observation, and it is actually the center of a major debate happening right now among grief counselors, psychologists, and theologians.
Because if I walk into a funeral home and the casket is closed and all I see are massive screens showing my loved one looking healthy, vibrant, and alive, aren't we just indulging the brain's denial mechanism?
Yes.
Are we using the beauty of modern technology to actively avoid doing the hard, ugly, agonizing work of accepting a physical loss?
It's a huge risk.
It feels like we are curating a highlight reel of a life and just sort of pretending the death part didn't happen.
A highlight reel funeral. That is a perfect description of the risk involved. Death is not a highlight reel. It is a profound, messy, and deeply painful transition.
It's not Instagram.
No, a video tribute can be a magnificent celebration of life, capturing the essence of the person's personality in a way a static body simply cannot.
Sure.
But if it is used solely as an avoidance mechanism, if the technology is deployed to shield the mourners from the reality of death, it can actually stunt the grieving process.
Yeah.
It creates a form of toxic positivity around grief.
Toxic positivity.
Right.
It
Yeah.
forces everyone to smile at the memories while actively suppressing the devastation of the reality.
Exactly. And this is exactly why the Catholic framework emphasizes flexibility, but also insists on the centrality of the physical body.
It's a balancing act.
The goal of the funeral rite is integration. It is about finding the right, delicate balance, honoring the harsh, uncompromising reality of death, refusing to shy away from the pain of grief, but simultaneously finding deep comfort in the memories of the life lived and the theological hope of the resurrection.
So technology can aid that process.
Immensely, by reminding the community of the joy that person brought into the world. But the pastoral guidance reminds us that the physical body, whether it is viewed in an open casket or honored in a closed one, must remain central to the rites.
The sacredness of the physical loss cannot be allowed to get lost in a multimedia presentation.
Exactly.
So it's really about using the photos to remember and celebrate the life while still sitting in the physical presence of the casket to acknowledge the sacred vessel that actually lived it.
You have to hold both truths at the same time, holding both the beauty of the life and the reality of the death simultaneously. That is the essence of healthy mourning.
And it brings us full circle to the core realization of our entire deep dive today.
It really does.
To summarize everything we've unpacked from our sources today, the Catholic perspective on viewing the body, the choice between an open or closed casket, the surprising stance on embalming, the profound symbolism of the pall.
None of it is a rigid, unyielding set of archaic rules designed to control people.
Right. It is actually a highly flexible, deeply pastoral framework. It is built entirely on a foundation of inherent dignity, profound psychological respect for how humans process trauma and personal choice.
All centering on this ultimate hope of resurrection.
And for you listening, understanding this framework has applications that go far beyond just knowing how to plan a Catholic funeral.
Absolutely. Whether you are ever in the position to make these agonizing decisions for a family member, whether you are simply attending a wake to support a grieving coworker, or if you are just fascinated by the rituals human beings invent to cope with mortality.
Understanding the why behind these practices is transformative.
It really is. It takes a process that can easily seem confusing, overly morbid, or needlessly formal, and reveals it to be a deeply meaningful, psychologically astute way of guiding human beings through their absolute darkest hours.
It takes away the fear of doing grief wrong. It replaces anxiety with an understanding of why we perform these ancient rituals at all. And that leaves me with one final lingering thought for us to wrap up on.
I'm ready.
Based on everything we discussed regarding the absolute centrality of the physical body, this foundational idea that the human form is a sacred temple that demands profound reverence even after the person has died, even after the owner has left the house. If we truly deeply internalize that concept, if a lifeless physical body is treated as a sacred temple deserving of immense respect, how might that perspective completely change the way we treat our own bodies and the bodies of the people around us while we are still living inside them?
Wow. If you truly believe that, it changes the geometry of how you interact with the entire world.
Something to chew on long after this deep dive is over. Thank you for exploring this with us. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.